Barcelona. People either seem to really love Barcelona or they don't really like it at all. You'll find a lot of people online talking about safety issues and just thinking it's dirty and not really loving it. I stayed in Barcelona for a full month. So I have some thoughts, and we're going to talk about things like safety, some of the cultural things that I really loved, and some things that I really didn't love so much. This is not one of those like first timer tips videos. I do have one of those, and I'll link to it, but this is going to be an unfiltered conversation of just my experience, observations, some of those things that don't get talked about as much, and a couple of the things that I guess if you are visiting, you probably do want to be aware of that are happening culturally in Barcelona. So that's what you can expect here. And if you don't know who I am, 10-second overview is my name's Camden. I've been moving to a new country every single month for about the last 3 years, and I make travel tip videos. So this is what you're getting yourself into right now. So let's first talk about the feeling of Barcelona. It is a big city, right? This is not one of those destinations in Europe that there's a lot of tourism, but historically there has not been nearly as much as there is now. Meaning people are less familiar with it compared to like a London, a Paris, a Rome in Europe. And again, all this is coming from an American perspective. That's where I grew up. But Barcelona has been really popular over the last few years. And one of the biggest challenges early on that they are facing is over tourism. If you Google Barcelona right now, you might see things like the go home tourist movement. You might see some of those videos on the news of locals like spraying tourists with like water guns, trying to basically just send a message. And there's a lot of information being put out right now about this go home tourist movement. And I definitely have some thoughts on it. So take everything that I'm about to say with a grain of salt, because again, I stayed for a month. I'm not your traditional tourist, right? And then I'm not there for a short period of time. I try to integrate into local life when I'm there, but I'm also not living there long term. It's just a month-long experience. When I was there, I did not experience the go home tourist movement like the news is presenting it. I never got sprayed with a water gun. Locals were always really warm and friendly and welcoming, to me. I didn't see those types of things happening. At the same time, I did see a lot of, just like graffiti and stuff all over the city of saying, go home tourists. You would have signs up in the streets saying, hey, this is a residential area, please be quiet. Because a lot of tourists, especially when you get into a heavy drinking culture, they like to be on vacation and aren't always respectful of local culture and people that are living there. And I totally get that. This seems to be something that is a common theme in my travels. I witnessed similar things in Portugal, definitely things in Bali, all over the world of this over-tourism. It seems like after the pandemic, a lot of places are experiencing that, and it seems like a lot of the frustration tends to be around housing because a lot of these places are bought by corporate entities or other folks who are buying properties that traditionally people would be living in, and they're renting them out to tourists, and that makes inflates the prices of homes for locals. People get pushed out of areas. Things for locals just get harder on top of just the streets being overwhelmed with tourists. So it is a sensitive topic. It is tough. I feel for the locals. I always feel I have this weird relationship with it because I know in some sense I am part of the problem, right? Like I am taking up housing for a month when I go to these places. It's a very I don't know. It's something that I think a lot about, and it's something that I'm constantly trying to think through and evaluate. But this is a very real thing that is happening. But I will also say the way that the news presents it doesn't seem totally accurate to what I experienced. I don't think that if you're planning a trip to Barcelona, it shouldn't detract you from going. You should actually go. You shouldn't cancel your trip, but you should be mindful of where you're staying, how you're interacting with locals, and just being respectful. And those things shouldn't have to be said, but unfortunately they do. But there is a big pain point there felt amongst the locals right now. So I think that's important to note first and foremost. We'll talk about safety things in just a minute because I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about safety. I want to talk about some of the positives, and then we'll get to one of the things I really don't love about Barcelona. But the city was just alive. Like, this is just one of those cities where, when people say there's just like a culture, Barcelona, when I think of Barcelona, I think, wow, this place has culture. It is lively. There's an energy, and that is through the people. Yes, the city itself is beautiful in a lot of ways. There's wonderful architecture and always unique things to see. It is a bit gritty. It is not one of the cleanest European cities, far from it. But there's an energy that is just really special here. And I think that really plays off of the locals and how they choose to live life. So some examples of it: any hour of the day, you're going to get to see people out in the streets interacting with life. It seemed to be a slower pace of life than your traditional European lifestyle. But what was really unique is the late night culture, which is different than a lot of European cities. A lot of European cities and countries, you have things shutting down pretty early. Not everywhere. And Barcelona is one of those extreme examples on the other side. It's not an early shutdown city. This is a late night city. And holy cow, like, it's just such a cool place to be. And when I talk about like late night, dinners aren't going to be happening here until like 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock. It is not uncommon at all to see children and elderly folk, people of all ages, out and about on the streets having fun at 11 o'clock at night, at midnight, even at like 1 in the morning. Like, not every part of town is going to be like that, but this is a late night culture, and it is just beautiful. It's something that's unique to experience, and I highly recommend taking part in it. So if you are traveling there, I highly recommend if you're looking for that cultural like immersion and really wanting to be a part of that for that short period of time that you're visiting, definitely, screw your regular eating schedule. Get ready to eat late. Get ready to sleep in a little bit, because things open up a little bit later. Things just happen later in the day here. And what you'll find is there are still restaurants that are going to be open during like the regular, and when I say regular, like American eating hours, 5, 6, 7 p.m. But keep in mind that when you see those, the vast majority of those are going to be catered to the tourists. And that doesn't mean they're going to be bad, but it means you're not going to be getting the local experience. And if you can wait a few hours, it's just a whole new world, and it's really quite special. I think a lot of tourists make the mistake of not fully getting the experience, the cultural experience in that way. But it's one of my favorite things. It's just, it's a really unique city in that regard. And one of the other things with that is the cuisine. No shock. I mean, the Spanish cuisine is phenomenal. I love the tapas bars. I was hanging out in those constantly. Ate way too much, but wow, the food, like, just incredible, great value, very communal eating settings. Like the tapas bars, yes, you can get, an actual table and keep to yourself, but it seemed like most of the people, at least at some of my favorite ones, like, it's one long bar and everybody's like around it and talking and communicating with one another. Things move fast. It's just, I don't know, there's just this energy, this vibrancy that is just special. So definitely, if you go, get out of your comfort zone a little bit, stay up late, go and eat in those local places. Barcelona is not one of the places where you need to pay up for food. The street food and those mid-tier places are all really high quality if you know where to look. Now, don't get me wrong, they have fantastic fine dining as well, but this is not one of those places where you need to spend a pretty penny to get good food like you might say in London or other places around Europe. So that's just a really special part about the culture. One of the things that I hated, and then we'll get into kind of the safety tips, and this is a weird nitpicky thing to hate, and hate is maybe a strong word here. I walk like everywhere. That's my preferred method of transportation. I don't like being in cars. I will take public transport, if it's the best option, but my primary choice is to walk. And you can walk this city. It is pretty spread out, but what I found myself really frustrated with was, from an infrastructure perspective, it's unique. When you go to an intersection in a lot of areas of town, normally you would have a square, right? You'd have the two streets, and it's, it's a square, right? It's really easy. That's how it is everywhere in the world. Well, here, it's not a square. It's an octagon. And that's really cool in a lot of ways, because it means that each like street corner feels like kind of like its own little neighborhood in some ways. Traffic flows really easy. There's a lot of just sunlight and airflow that gets through, which is all wonderful. Love those. But as a pedestrian walking, especially in the summer months when it's really hot in Barcelona, you'll find, at least if you're like me, you might find yourself getting frustrated saying, dang, I am so used to being able to walk somewhere in like 15, 20 minutes, and everywhere seems to be taking longer to walk to here. And that's because it's an octagon. Rather than just crossing the street and continuing down, if you want to take, let's say you're walking straight and you're going left, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then up. Like, there's just a lot of little extra layers. I know that probably sounds weird and doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but if you pull up a map and you really look at it, you'll notice that like each time you're going to interact with an intersection, there's just going to be extra time allocated towards that. And again, I know that is really nitpicky, but it's a really interesting cultural thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, but should be noted for pedestrians out there. Again, not something that you're necessarily going to hate, but keep that in mind if you are going to attack the city by foot. It's just an interesting thing. So I thought I'd mention that. Good news is public transportation is phenomenal. And most of the places that you're walking are pretty beautiful. I always felt safe, and we'll get to the safety in a minute. But public transportation was really simple, even to figure out as a tourist. Getting to and from the airport, it's really close by. Like, this is a great city in terms of just being able to access different parts of it because it is walkable. There are great bike lanes if you're a biker, public transport, etc. Just keep all those things in mind. But let's talk about the safety, because a lot of people talk about the safety with Barcelona and say, man, it's a place that I'll never go. You read horror stories online, and a lot of it is around like pickpocketing. And that happens, in every city around the world. There's pickpocketing, right? I'm certainly not going to refute the statistics that are out there. I know that Barcelona does have a higher rate of pickpocketing compared to other places in Europe. But from a safety perspective, I never felt unsafe in my month being there. And I was constantly out at night. I was out a lot with my wife at night. And there were many times where I was walking the city at night completely alone. And I think because there's that late night culture, I think that actually helps make things feel safer, because there are very few instances, unless you ended up in a weird area of town, it'd be pretty rare for you to be walking around, let's say even at 11 o'clock at night, and for there not to be a lot of other people, which I think makes it easy and provides that sense of safety, because you're like, okay, if there's people around, like, nothing's going to happen. So I'm not saying let your guard down, but I didn't feel like this is one of those cities where I'd say, hey, you really need to be careful here. Of course there are pockets, and you should do your research and make sure that you stay around, stay away from certain areas. Don't walk into an alley, if it's dark and you're alone. Just your typical things. But I didn't feel like this was a particularly unsafe city. In fact, I felt far unsafer in other major European cities than I did in Barcelona. It would be a place that I would have no problem sending my mom or sisters, or wife off to. Like, I didn't experience those things that other people were talking about. It's not to say it doesn't exist, but I think that if you are somebody who's traveled abroad and take general precautions, there's not a whole lot to worry about outside of that petty theft. And I don't know, I think there's just easy workarounds there. So of course, be aware, be cognizant, but I don't think the safety aspects are as extreme as some people are leading on, if that makes sense. So much so that I'd actually recommend at least schedule for one night, go on that night walk. Make sure you're in a all right area of town, which most of it is going to be completely fine. But take a walk at night. The city is really special at night. The architecture is just stunning. They do a really nice job with the lighting. So you're definitely going to want to see the city at night and take part of that. So just don't be freaking out about the safety in that regard. And another piece of the culture that I found really interesting, and you'll mainly see this if you're out in the mornings, actually, because people get a later jump. A lot of businesses, they're not going to open up till a little bit later. Midday, like to early afternoon, things are going to close and then open back up for dinner. When places are closed, it's actually a really fun time to walk the city, because it's a completely different vibe. The streets will be a little bit emptier, but a lot of these like restaurants and businesses, they all protect themselves by kind of having like what I'm calling like a garage pull down thing. Like, if you're like in a mall and a store is closing and they have like the chain things that come down and, make sure you can't get in. Most places have that in Barcelona, but it's like the full shutters. Looks like a garage. But what's really unique is, from an artistic perspective, most of the places are decorating those. Like, they're painting, they're hiring graffiti artists, they're doing something with it to express themselves, express the business, and they're all so different. And I just loved walking around the town looking at all of these. Like, I've got 1.5 million pictures of just some of my favorite garage cover things. I don't know what exactly to call them, but that is a really special part of the culture. And I think you'll find that all over town. Barcelona, unlike some European cities where there's some European cities where only wealthy people can afford to be there. Barcelona is definitely moving in that direction. Things are getting pricier, right? But it is still very much a city where you're going to interact with a lot of young people, old people, and everything in between. There's a lot of families. It feels like a place where there's something for everybody, and because of that, you get a lot of diversity in the art, in the scenery, in just the feel and the energy around. So I think from an artistic perspective, walking around the city and seeing all those different aspects are really special. So I think those are my main points for you to take away is don't be too scared off from a safety perspective. Definitely make sure that you get out and see the city at night and interact with the local people. They're very kind. One of the things that you'll notice is there's less English spoken in Barcelona than in other major European cities. But I don't think this is a destination where you should again be deterred if you don't speak Spanish. If you do speak Spanish or can even speak a little bit, try. The locals are very warm and welcoming in attempting to speak it with you, and they're pretty patient. My Spanish is pretty abysmal, but I tried my best, and I had some good conversations with folks in Spanish from what I could pick up, and a lot of them switched to English when we got to the points where I couldn't articulate myself and express myself. But don't worry about it in that regard, but it still does feel like a place where you are getting to step into their world. I find that in some European cities, like, it's so comfortable. It's so much like the US. There's so much English being spoken that sometimes European cities, like, English actually becomes like the default because there are so many tourists. That's not the case in Barcelona. It is definitely still Spanish. And I don't know. It's just good to see them hanging on to a lot of pieces of the culture. So yes, there are going to be tons of tourists. Be ready for the packs, especially in the summer months. But if you're a local, I would love to know from your perspective, what are your experiences like living there and interacting with tourists? What can tourists do to help mitigate some of the issues that you're facing locally? What are some things that you want tourists to be mindful of? I find that this audience is really great with being respectful and thoughtful. So I'm looking forward to all the comments in the comment section about just people's experiences. And I want to hear from you whether you are a tourist who has visited Barcelona or if you are that local. But please be respectful. And that's just one of my favorite parts about this series is with this format, I feel like we really get to learn from each other. And I really feel like I get to learn more from you guys than you from me, because my experience is short-lived, right? It's month long. So I recognize that a lot of people are going to have different experiences. So share your unfiltered, honest, but respectful thoughts and experiences on Barcelona. And if you found that this was helpful and you want regular tips from me, I do have a newsletter that I send out every single Tuesday, share kind of a personal update of where I'm traveling, as well as an actual travel tip. And of course, if you want all of my first-timer travel tips for Barcelona, you can watch this on what I wish I knew before visiting and what I loved and hated about Barcelona. Most of the hates aren't real hates. They're a little bit nitpicky, but some things that I think you should be aware of. So I hope this was all helpful. Looking forward to reviewing the comments, and we'll catch you guys next time.